Hi there, welcome back. My name's Eric and I'm the Education Coordinator here at the Friendship Center in Helena, Montana. We're coming to you today with another video that's designed to educate about domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. For those of you who haven't seen these before, we are a nonprofit, community-based advocacy organization that offers services to folks who've been impacted by domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Today I'd like to chat with you about why victims and survivors of domestic violence sometimes choose to remain in abusive or unsafe relationships. As advocates and supporters of folks who may be experiencing some type of intimate partner violence or abuse, it can be really tempting to become frustrated with that person because we simply don't understand why they keep making those decisions. A question that many of us have asked ourselves at least once is, why do victims stay in abusive relationships? Today I'm here to help you hopefully understand a little bit more about what it is that drives a victim to remain in or to return to a relationship that you may not feel is safe or healthy for that person you care about. As we're trying to understand why victims and survivors of abuse might stay in an unhealthy or unsafe relationship, it's really important to remember that relationships, dating partnerships that is, don't begin with abuse. We get involved with people in that way because we like the person. We like things about the person. We have fun together. We have interests in common. Maybe we have mutual friends. Relationships start because two people are interested in one another and two people treat each other in a way that feels good for both. It takes time in relationships for abuse to begin and for abuse to escalate. We as advocates and as support people for victims and survivors of abuse need to remember that when the person we are trying to help began their dating relationship with their abusive partner, there was some good stuff for them. It's really, really important for us to keep in mind that as abuse begins or escalates, those good feelings, that love, that attachment, that caring for the offender don't automatically go away. It's really hard for us to remember that the relationship we're concerned about began with two people who enjoyed each other's company. For us as support people, and here at the Friendship Center, for us as advocates, we primarily see the harm that's being caused to that person we're trying to help. Remember, just because abuse is present does not necessarily mean that there is not still love and compassion and care happening in that relationship. Love and abuse can exist side by side. And in many, if not most abusive relationships, they do, at least to some extent. So why do victims stay in abusive relationships? That's reason number one. Those relationships still contain love and care and affection, even if abuse is present. Moving on to the next reason why victims choose to stay in abusive relationships, we need to utilize a tool called the cycle of abuse. And this tool is designed specifically for the purpose of helping us understand the dynamics of domestic violence in romantic relationships. In order to help you understand the cycle of abuse, I'd like to switch to voiceover mode. And I'll display for you the cycle of abuse, and we'll talk about what it looks like and how it impacts victims and survivors. What you see displayed in front of you is called the cycle of abuse, or it's sometimes called the cycle of violence. This is a tool that's designed to help us all understand how the patterns of abuse and violence play out in romantic relationships, and in many ways this helps us to understand why victims and survivors might choose to stay in a relationship that we see as abusive. So let's discuss the different phases of the cycle of abuse. And we'll start by exploring what we refer to as the tension building phase. In this tension building phase, we see an escalation in the negative behaviors on the part of the offending partner. This can look many different ways, but often takes shape as increased threats or intimidation, more emotional abuse, such as name calling, put downs, shaming, and blaming. This could really be anything that the offender feels is useful for them in reestablishing dominance in that relationship. The response of the victim in the tension building phase of the cycle of abuse is to try to de-escalate the situation, try to calm their offending partner, and try to keep things from getting out of hand or violent. Remember, as we look at this cycle of abuse, that this pattern, while similar in nature for most abusive relationships, looks very different for individual couples. We know that for us as human beings, tension cannot build forever, and there eventually has to be a resolution. In healthy relationships, the resolution to tension might take the form of a discussion or an argument or a breakup, even, maybe a separation. All of those things are resolutions to tension building. In abusive relationships, the resolution to building tension most often looks like one or more acts of violence or one or more acts of abuse. This is where we transition into a period of abusive incidents, or we might call it the explosive phase. In this explosive or abusive phase of the cycle of abuse, this is where we start to see really concerning behaviors on the part of the offending partner. This often looks like acute incidents of abuse that we would recognize as physical in nature, sexual in nature. This could be threats with a weapon or strangulation. This could be many, many different things. But for us as advocates, we tend to see the abusive incident phase as the time of most danger for the victim. The victim's response to this abuse in the explosive phase of the cycle is exactly what we would expect. It is an attempt to survive. Victims and survivors during the abusive incident phase are doing everything in their power to reduce the harm that they encounter and to try to stay alive. For many victims and survivors, this might also include the protection of children in the home or pets in the home or family members that have been threatened by the abusive partner. When the abusive partner is satisfied that they have regained power and control in their relationship, they change their behaviors, and we swing into what's often referred to as the honeymoon phase and what we recognize as a period of calm or maybe a period of good things happening in this relationship. In this honeymoon phase or this period of calm, this is where victims and survivors often report seeing their abusive partner return to being that person that they originally fell in love with. We'll often hear victims tell us that their abusive partner has made promises to change their behaviors, to change their patterns. These abusers often promise to stop drinking or using drugs. They might promise to go to church or to find therapy or to use some other tools that will help them be a better partner to the victim. We think of promises made during the honeymoon phase as not truthful because it is the repetition of these behaviors that signal to us that this offender is in fact an abusive partner instead of someone who simply did a bad thing. This cycle tells us that this person is going to continue to cause harm over and over again instead of actually making a change to do better for their family or their partner. During the honeymoon phase, it's absolutely natural for the victim of abuse to want to believe in what is being told to them by the offending partner. Victims and survivors truly want to believe that their partner is going to change their behavior and things are going to get better in this relationship. To us, on the outside looking in, this may seem naive. But remember, we discussed how there often is love and care and compassion still present in this relationship. Victims and survivors tend to still care about their abusive partner, even though the abuse has been ongoing. So when we find ourselves in this honeymoon phase of the cycle, it's absolutely normal for us as human beings to want to believe that things will get better. Once the honeymoon phase, where things have calmed down and promises have been made to do better, has taken its course, the cycle unfortunately starts back over again. When we have shown clients at the Friendship Center this tool, the cycle of abuse displayed the way you see it before you, most of our clients will tell us that this is how their relationship functions. This cycle of abuse teaches us several things. First, it gives us an insight into the dynamics of domestic violence. It helps us understand potentially what it actually feels like or looks like to be in that state of constantly moving through tension into abuse and then into honeymoon or calm. This gives us an insight into the perspective of victims and survivors who are experiencing the fluctuations in the behavior of their offending partner. When we ask ourselves, why do victims stay in abusive relationships? Being able to recall this cycle of abuse and its different phases is extremely helpful. This cyclical pattern of behavior really helps us as support people understand how victims and survivors can get trapped in these relationships. Remember, abusive relationships don't tend to be abusive 100% of the time. There is a period of good, there is a period of calm, and during the course of this cycle of abuse, victims and survivors often recognize that if they get through the hardships, the difficult part of the cycle, they will be rewarded with a partner who shows them care and affection again. Once we've seen and begin to understand this cycle of abuse, we can really start to understand why victims might choose to stay in abusive relationships. It is the cycle itself that convinces people to stay in the unhealthy or unsafe relationship. Due to the nature of repetitive behaviors, we can recognize that victims and survivors of abuse build for themselves protective mechanisms because they know what to expect at any point in time in their relationship based on the behavior of their offending partner. When tension starts to build in an abusive relationship, the victim or the survivor in that relationship typically knows what is likely to happen and even when it is likely to happen. We often hear from clients that they knew at a certain moment in time that something bad was going to happen because of something their offender did. When we transition from tension building into the abusive incident phase of the cycle, victims and survivors tend to know what that abuse is going to look like and feel like. They tend to know how to survive that abuse and how to come through it with as minimal injuries as possible because they have experienced it before. Victims and survivors know what works and what doesn't work to navigate the phases of this cycle and the behaviors of their abuser. And during this tension building and abusive incident phase of the cycle, victims and survivors do know that once they make it through these bad pieces, there will be some good stuff afterwards in the honeymoon phase or the calm phase. This cycle of abuse becomes the normal existence for victims in abusive relationships. This is the pattern that their life follows. Victims and survivors of abuse are human beings, and any human being can feel scared in a new environment. For a victim or survivor, when they leave the relationship where this cycle is playing out, that is a new environment for them. They no longer know what to expect and when to expect it because they've exited the cycle of abuse. It's really important to remember that when a victim or survivor leaves an abusive relationship, the cycle of abuse does not automatically end. Remembering that the desire for power and control are the drivers of offender behaviors, we can realistically understand that an offending partner is not simply going to stop causing harm to a victim or survivor because they have left that relationship. Offending partners want to continue on this cycle of abuse. It is what they know how to do, it's what they feel comfortable with. Just because a victim or survivor has stepped out of this cycle does not mean that they are automatically safe. We as advocates know that the vast majority of women who are murdered in the United States each year are murdered by current or former male intimate partners. And we know that most of those women are murdered after having recently left the abusive relationship. This tells us that many victims and survivors might actually be safer if they stay in the relationship and participate in this cycle of abuse, utilizing the protective mechanisms that they have learned for themselves while this cycle has been ongoing for them. It's very common for victims and survivors of abuse to recognize that they're in real danger of being severely physically harmed or even killed if they leave the abusive relationship. Many victims and survivors strategically stay in the abusive relationship because they feel safer knowing what is happening in the mind of their abuser and knowing how to navigate the phases of the cycle of abuse. I hope it's been helpful for you to see the cycle of abuse and to have some explanation of the different phases of that cycle. I hope that you're starting to understand that there is good reason why many victims and survivors choose to stay in abusive relationships. That cycle teaches us a lot about the safety of victims and survivors and how they manage the behaviors of their offending partners. Helping victims and survivors leave unsafe relationships truly is about the continued offer of support. That looks like us continually telling them, hey, I'm concerned about you, here's why. I'm worried for your safety, here's why. I want you to be safe, I want you to be happy, I want you to be healthy. What can I do to help you? That is the type of language that signals to the person you care about that you will be there when they need you. Offering transportation or a safe place to stay or anything else they may need is exactly the right thing to do to help your friend or your loved one move towards healing, move towards escaping that abusive relationship. Asking victims and survivors, why do you stay? Why don't you just leave? Why do you put up with that type of behavior? While it may be well-intentioned, to them often sounds like judgment. And if it seems to that person like we are judging their choices, they may not trust us as a support person. They may not see us as someone who's going to be there for them when they really need us. If you've taken anything away from our time together today, I hope it's that victims and survivors have good reasons for staying in abusive relationships. For many, it's safer than leaving, and it is absolutely normal for any person in a romantic relationship to want that relationship to be better. If there's someone in your life who's in an unsafe or unhealthy relationship and you want to help them, please, please, please simply ask them how you can help. Let them know that you're concerned and then ask them what they need from you. That is the best way to show your support and to let them know that if they ever choose to leave that situation, you will be there to help. If there's anything we here at the Friendship Center can do for you, please don't hesitate to call. Whether you've experienced abuse yourself or you're trying to support someone who has, our team of trained professional advocates can provide you with some options, some guidance, some resources. Remember, all of our services are free and confidential. We run a 24/7 crisis line. We can always be reached at 406-442-6800, and you can learn more about us on our website at www.thefriendshipcenter.org. From all of us here at the Friendship Center, I hope you're well and I hope you're safe.